Everybody, today we are going to learn how to texture our pencil. In the past two follow along videos, we've modeled our pencil and we've UV laid out our pencil. Now it's time to give it the appearance of what you see here. So what's involved with texturing is we need to obviously create color for our pencil pieces, but in addition, we want to also simulate visible texture, so the feeling of a tactile experience, and we also want to show different shading in the sense of what is very shiny and what isn't as shiny. So I've gone ahead and provided you the video or the model here that I'm using so everyone's on the same page. And if you notice, I'm going to go ahead and open up my UV editor here and select the whole pencil. We have our UV layout, which is very important for this project. And we're going to learn just different ways to create maps and to work with our final object. So one of the very first things that we want to look at is all the different pieces. And you want to make sure when you export your UV snapshot that you select all of the pieces. Now, I didn't go and combine every single piece. These are still very separate. But when I select them all together and do a polygon UV snapshot, that's how I get this final product. Also, what I want to realize is, again, there are different types of materials and textures on this model, and not everything is going to look 100% perfect. So one of the first things I typically do when I'm texturing a model is I find my seams, and my seam here happens to be on the one side of the pencil. So you can see there's going to be kind of a different seam on the bottom. And if you look at the very bottom of my metal piece, I actually have quite a distorted seam there too. So I want to make sure I don't put anything too crazy on the bottom of that seam. And the eraser looks pretty good. I have maybe some seams on the edge. That's something I can kind of deal with later. And the tip of the pencil actually is the cleanest, with the seam being right on the bottom. Seams are inevitable, but as long as the majority of your squares are perfectly square, you should be fine. So this is our end game. Let's get started. I want to show you a few different ways to kind of produce this image. All right. So first thing we need to do is obviously UV snapshot this. So I'm going to go ahead into my UV editor and I'm going to do a polygons UV snapshot, and I'm going to make sure it goes to the right folder. So I have my pencil assignment folder, and we'll go to images, and I will call this UV snapshot, which I actually already have. I'll just override it. There we go. Hit save. I want to make my scene in a power of 2. So in this case, let's make ours 2048 by 2048 and change our image format to something easily readable in a JPEG. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. It's going to override that file, and I have a new UV snapshot. Now, I'm going to show you multiple programs. This is going to differ from a typical follow-along video because I want you to produce the final outcome. Your end game is to make this pencil look like the picture. So a shiny metal piece, a somewhat shiny kind of polished shaft of the pencil, a not shiny piece of wood here, and then maybe a somewhat shiny piece of graphite with a non-shiny eraser. So using the same colors and using the same methods, I want you to go ahead and attempt this view. So let me show you a few ways to do that. So in other words, there is going to be no end example. Your creativity is going to help deem the end example. And you can see the pencil right here is a pretty good example to get you started with. So one of the ways we can do this is we can open Adobe Photoshop. And I can either use my Wacom tablet or a Cintiq or whatever tools you have. In this case, I'm going to just use a mouse, and I'm going to lay out basic shapes and basic shaders. So let's get this open here, and let's do a file, and we'll do an open, and we'll go to pencil assignment, and I believe I put it in images. There it is. UV snapshot. Great. Give it a few seconds to open up here. Now, I have Maya and Photoshop open, so you most likely can hear the fan running on my computer in the background. There's really nothing I can do about that. It is a very intensive program to have open with two large ones, but in this case we kind of need to have it that way. So we'll give it a few more seconds here, and then there we go, get this thing working. All right, so you can see we have our snapshot. The next step, what I typically like to do when I'm using Photoshop, is start by just laying out my layers. So I'm going to go to layers, and I'm going to actually make some groups. This is going to be a little easier. So go to the group folder, and I'm going to type metal, and I'll do another group, and I'll call this group I'll call it the yellow part of the pencil. That's pretty easy to remember. I'll call this group the wood. And then finally, we have that red eraser. Great. All right. So having these subgroups is pretty important. And hopping back into Maya with your UV texture editor open is also important, so you can start isolating what UV shells are where. So we'll start with the metal piece. And you can see these are two of the metal pieces, so we know to isolate those and make those metal. So I'll go ahead and I'll start with that. And you can do this multiple ways. Actually, you could go in and use your lasso tool and select this. I can even use my polygon lasso tool and kind of roughly select these shapes. That's all right. That takes some time. I kind of like to speed things up. So I'm going to try my magic wand tool, and we'll go to magic wand, and we'll select everything outside of these areas, and then I'm going to invert that selection. Now I have these. So the cool thing about that is it kind of grabs what we want, and at this point I can just fill in the areas I need. So if I marquee and I subtract from my selection the areas I don't need, you can see by just going through here, it actually helps speed up your selection process. So now I only have those two areas selected. And let's go, that would be the metal piece. Let's create a new layer, and let's fill these with just a starting color of, I don't know, it's kind of an orangey color, but it does have some reddish in it. Let's try this color. Let's start by filling those there. All right, so I'm going to call this base color. All right, I'm going to continue to move forward, and let's see, for next is my pencil. So the yellow part of the pencil. So let's go back to the UV editor, and we'll go to the UV editor here, and let's just select the base of that pencil, and we can see that this is the tip, this is the base, so this part would need to be yellow, the big top part. So in Photoshop, I will highlight that. This one I can be a little more messy with. Go to yellow and create it. And another good trick is to actually open a pencil, like open a picture of a pencil and use your eyedropper tool. So if you're wondering kind of what shader everything is, let's see if we can't do that. Let's go to the pencil assignment here, and I should have those in my source images. There it is. Check this out. I got it right here. So I can use my eyedropper key and actually highlight that color pencil. And you can see I picked a way off color on that other one, so we'll add that in a second. But let's fill this. I'm going to hit Alt-Delete to fill that area. And let's go back to our metal piece, and I'm going to hold Command and click on those pieces. And let's grab, using our I key, eyedropper, maybe a metalish texture, and go back in here and fill those in. There we go. So now we're getting kind of what we want to do. Go back to Maya and continue the process. We know this is going to be primarily the wood texture. It's not going to completely be a wood texture, but something, again, we're going to want to keep in mind as we go forward. So maybe I'll open one of the close-up pictures so I can have that image. And we have a lot of this kind of swerving to do, but that's going to be in our detail. So I'll hit I and kind of grab a nice texture there. That's good. And I'm going to use the polygon lasso tool here, and I'm going to actually fill in the whole thing. So again, You don't want to be completely messy. You can, though, break the edges. You can paint outside the lines just ever so slightly. It will help. And we'll go into our wood, make a new layer, make sure it's in our wood folder. There it is. And fill that. All right. Now we have some other pieces we have to kind of deem what is what. So we're going to have to zoom in. One is that red eraser. So let's see which one that was. The red eraser looks like these two bottom parts down here. Pretty easy to kind of fill in. Make sure I'm in object mode. Yep, there they are. Cool. And so this is kind of the process that you're going to be working in. You know, whether you use your specific selection tools or not. Let's see. There's the eraser. I can use my marquee tool. Knowing your Photoshop hotkeys is extremely important. Here I'm holding Alt and Control, and I'm going to actually sample. Let's see where that is. Right there. Hit I and sample this color and get my base materials in. So Alt Delete, and then the marquee tool, and we're going to slightly select Alt Delete. There we go. And then this seemingly, I believe this is the graphite tip of the pencil. So we're going to want to select that. Hit the I key on our keyboard. Get that nice graphite color. Get the marquee. And we'll probably need another one called graphite. Make a new layer. Graphite. I spelled that wrong, I feel. Graphite, I don't know. Close enough. And let's click out of this and fill that. Now, part of this piece is also graphite. So here's a good little trick in Photoshop. I actually duplicate my graph here, my UV test grid, and then I put it on the very top stack of all my layers and set that stack to a screen, and then I can kind of see where certain things are. So let's go back to Maya and let's zoom in and figure out kind of where this pencil tip would end. So if I go in here and I look at my model, I've already drawn some indicators where I know this is kind of where my tip is and this is going to be where that wave is. So I can go ahead and select these in Photoshop. We'll do the polygon lasso tool again. That will be pretty good. And we'll take our time. And if we really wanted to as well, we could do this. We could play with the swirls. So let's use the regular lasso tool and see if we can't get that to work. We'll draw some swirls. It's like Bob Ross, happy little trees. And do that. Go to our graphite layer, and you could probably guess what we're going to do next. We're going to put that on our graphite layer. Alright, so if we eyeball this off, we have a pretty messy looking pencil, but this is kind of the base of our color map. This is not done by any means. This is our base graphite here. Alright, so let's go ahead and save a Photoshop version of this. So we want to make sure that we get a PSD out of this and call this color working file. Having a working file is very important. And then we're going to save as a color map file. We'll make it a JPEG to flatten all the layers. And let's see what we get. So we're going to go back into Maya. And here's the trick. When applying a texture onto your whole model, the only trick is you must select everything that's on that UV map, right click, and in this case we're going to assign a blend. And I'll talk about that in a second. But a BLIN, named after Jim Blinn. And we're going to assign favorite material blend. They're all one shader. And just like your UV test grid, you can tell they're one shader if you change the kind of slider here. We're going to go to the checkerboard box, hit File, load our file, find our pencil, images, color map, and there we go. So we got some good things happening here. You can definitely see that worked really, really well, didn't it? I have a little bit of weirdness that probably is my grid cutting through there. But overall, not too bad. That's the basic appearance of our pencil. So that's a good starting point to know if your UVs actually look right or whatnot. Let's go ahead and take this a little further. Let's kind of figure out where the yellow works. So let's go back and let's stay in Maya real quick and do a UV editor. Let's see where these faces, okay, so those are those faces. Maybe we can pull in the yellow of the pencil like we did the other one. So I'll turn this back on. I will get my lasso tool, and in this case, I'll make these just a little bigger, the shavings of the pencil. And it's going to be really messy, but messy can be okay sometimes. And that's going to be the yellow of the pencil, so I'm going to hit I, I'm going to load up that yellow, and I'll go to the yellow here, and I'm going to add this to the yellow. Now you can see I need to move my layers around, so I'm going to move the yellow folder actually above the wood folder, and that's going to help there. So now we have that. We can turn this off. We can save it as that color map. The great thing is once we get into this process, let me close down this for a second. This is pretty cool. It will update it for you if it wants to work for me. Give my computer a bit of time to catch up to speed here. We can just go into our color map. My computer is way behind here, it's lagging a little bit. And we're going to reload that color map. So let's do that. Come on. Come on, color map. Let's save this as something. We'll call it pencil color base. And give that a few seconds, let it run through. Quit this real quick. My Maya gets really tricky sometimes, as you can probably tell. There we go. Let's open up pencil color base. And that's also too because I have Photoshop open. I'm working off my laptop. And here, there we go. It reloaded that texture for us too, which was really nice. And you can see now we have that texture kind of coming through. I probably drew those a little too big. I'd probably have to go back to my drawing board. Now, let's talk about the shininess. You can see what I've done is I've applied a blend shader. And a blend shader has something called specular shader attributes. So I can actually adjust the shininess of my shader and the reflectivity of that shader as I go forward. Well, what I'm going to do is we can actually create a mask on and to tell Maya what is shiny and what is not. So if we look at the original picture that we have, we know that the shiniest part is going to be this material here. And this is our metal material. The second shiniest part is probably going to be the body of the pencil, followed by either the graphite or the eraser. The wood is going to be the least shiniest part. Now to make a specular map, it's really easy. What you're going to do is you're going to try to open up Photoshop here. My computer is just not liking me. Okay. Let's open the working PSD file, and we're going to make a mask off of our already put together elements. So let me shut this down. Bear with me for a second. There we go. Open up our Photoshop. There we go. We'll open the working file. Here we go. Okay, so specular maps work this way. Whatever white you're going to see, and it's going to be the shiniest that it can be. So I would start by knowing these are my metal parts. I would start by selecting these areas. All right, so one of the quick ways I do that is because I've already built it organized, is I would grab those two areas, and those are going to be white in my map. So I'm going to create a new layer above everything, and I can call this spec map. Okay, specular means shininess. So I'm going to fill those with white. Now the second shiny part is going to be the yellow eraser, right? So I'm going to go inside my yellow pencil body. I don't want that to be as shiny as the metal. So instead of white, I'm going to actually take it down to a little more gray. And then I'm going to kind of continue to work my way down here. Let's go to the graphite. The graphite's going to be subtly shiny, but not anywhere near these. So I'll pull that down further. And we'll go to spec map. There we go. Actually, what I did here was a bonehead move, but we'll make it work. And this is going to be the eraser. The eraser is not very shiny at all, so let's go ahead and select the eraser elements, and let's put them in almost black. Black means they're going to have almost no specularity whatsoever. And that leaves us the wood. So let me shut down some of my layers and go to wood. Grab that. And on the wood layer, let's go ahead and make that completely black. It's going to not have any shininess whatsoever. Now, we got to be careful because of that graphite layer. So if I'm going to put that underneath it, I may want to do something like a new layer there. So it looks like that. All right, now anything that's black will not be shiny. Anything that is gray or white will have some shininess to them. I'm going to save this scene as, and we'll call it spec map. And we're going to save it as a JPEG again. Put it into that same folder. So right now, by default, Maya doesn't have a specular map in it, meaning everything's the same shininess. You can kind of see it when I rotate, everything's kind of shining. But if now I go back to my blend shader and I go to specular color, I'm going to go ahead and plug this. Is basically a mask, a file texture, and I'm going to load that specular map. So pencil assignment, images, right there, spec map. And now, watch what happens. Now you can see when I move these sliders, notice the shininess on the eraser isn't really moving. Well, that's because now I'm dealing with specularity. So that's really neat. And you can see when I move the shininess, it doesn't adjust it on the actual area of the pencil. Now I need to be careful to include that little wave pattern as well. So let me go back and let's readjust this specular map here. So let's go into wood and let's turn these off real quick. Do the yellow or metal of the pencil. Got to find where we put that kind of wavy map on our pencil itself. So we'd have to go back and adjust that. But that's your basic specular map. All right, so that kind of controls the specularity of where your pencil is. And at this point, usually once you have your basic color, you can start making your other maps. But what you'd want to do now is deal with some shading. So on all these layers, what I challenge you guys to do is to go through and kind of figure out what is what. So what I mean by that is if you're working on your metal piece, go all the way down to your metal layer, add a new layer, maybe use your brush tool, get a nice soft brush in Photoshop, and you can start, and we'll turn down the opacity to maybe 10%, you can start shading different areas. And you need to know what piece is what. This is not just a guessing game. So if I go back to Maya and look at my UV editor, and I grab this metal piece, I need to know what edges are what. And these look like the long edges. these look like the gaps in between them. So therefore I would paint just these little parts. So let's get our brush mode. I think I'm in Photoshop, but I'm not. And let me show you what that would do. So again, I'm rushing this with my mouse, but you would take the time, kind of draw down the area. Again, if you have a tablet, this works rather well. Okay, and you kind of just could make your markings. Always do these on separate layers, because then you can always turn down the opacity if it's too rough. And what you're going to end up having is a pretty decent kind of block. Continue to do that and go through the whole model, and we can even go and add some to the eraser. We'll add that. Add in some shading. And when you get to the point that you like, again, the trick is you take it off, and I did this really sloppily, but you save it. So we'll do it just to see it. Do a save as color map, make it a JPEG, replace, okay. And you can see now, kind of auto replaces it, which is really nice. But now, let me zoom in. And we can kind of play with those settings. So let's hit reload. And I forgot to turn my other ones on, but I want to show you that that shading is now there. All right, which is really nice. So this is one way you can work. The other way, and you would continue and make your pencil and put any like text on the pencil that you want, all that good stuff. But the other way is not necessarily using this method. And real quick, I'm gonna, just because it's bugging me, accidentally put this yellow gray here. So I'm gonna go into here and click it. Put that back to its pencil yellow. There we go. Make it actually bright yellow here. And save, color map, JPEG. There we go. Back to Maya. Reload. There we go. So we can start getting that texture appearing the way we want it. Now, another way to do this, like I just mentioned, is to use something called a bump map or a normal map. And bump mapping and normal mapping will give you textural aspects throughout your scene. So let me show you essentially what this is. And we're not going to use, in this case, a file texture per se, but we're going to use like a noise. So let's do this, let's do a bump map, and it's a mask, but let's do it just on the eraser. So let's go into our eraser, and we'll shift select those, make a new layer, and let's fill these with noise. So bump maps work off of black and white. So if we add noise here, we need to fill it with something here. Let's try it now. Bump maps. So I filled it with noise. There we go. It's going to work off black and white. Now if we turn everything else off, but just keep this black and white, and let's put black underneath it. Oops, deselect that. This is going to appear bumpy. So let me save this real quick, and just like the specular map, this is called your bump map. We're going to make that a JPEG. And bump maps are pretty cool. We're going to show you different types. This is a 2D bump map. Next to the word bump mapping, we're going to load this file. And we have a little tab that says File 4, so we'll find that bump map. And as you can see, what it does is kind of neat. It creates this bumpy appearance. It's not actually changing the geometry, but the bump map, if I hit the input, is actually giving us an illusion of bumpiness based off black and white. Think of it if you've ever done a displacement map in Photoshop. So I'm going to use my inputs and outputs here to go back, and I'm actually going to tone down that bumpiness. So now we have a pretty decent bump to that eraser. Kind of cool, right? And you could go and do this for all different things. And so bump maps are essentially black and white versions of, or masks, where specular maps are black, white, and gray as well, but they deal with masking out specularity and shininess. Bump maps will mask out the illusion of height. So again, a bump map, a 2D bump map, is gray, black, and white, and you put it in the bump map section of your shader, where the specular map is different. It goes only on a blend or a shader with specularity, and that shader will allow you to change the highlight or the shininess factor per piece in your scene. So you can have one shader with a bunch of different shininess factors going on. So kind of a neat process, but we can do so much more with this. So I want to show you more advanced ways to make your models look really, really cool. So this is the Maya way. You would continue to paint and shade and add, different parts and make it look as realistic as possible, which I'm going to stop doing this one right now. I would like, if you guys choose to use the Photoshop way, I want you to push the shading, the highlights and shadows, everything you possibly can think of, push in these files. Make it look as realistic as possible using all of your tools in Photoshop. And I'll show you some examples here in a bit. Now, what if we don't want to use Photoshop? Well, there's a program by Algorithmic called Substance Painter. I'm going to go to it right here. And it's actually free for students. Now, this program is not in the labs at UCF yet, but you can download, if you scroll down to the bottom here, you can get a license for students and teachers, which is pretty cool. So you can go get my license, you can go and pick Substance Painter, and you can say I want to get an education license, and you can log in, and they'll let you download for 1 year, and it's renewable, so you can keep doing it, for you to use on your home machine. Now, why is this program so good? Well, watch what it can do. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a new scene here. And let's open up, I'm going to export my file. So let's do open recent, because I just closed the wrong one, pencil UV. Give it a few seconds to load up. There it is. I'm going to grab my file. I'm going to add that blend on it. There we go. And I'm going to do a file export all. And let's make this an FBX. And make sure it goes into our pencil assignment folder. I'll put it on the out port here, or the outer folder. And I'm going to type pencil export. Alright, remember this is a pre-UV'd texture, so it's all there. Now, I'm going to close this down and give it a few seconds here to catch up. And I'm going to search for Substance Painter. So I'm going to go to my spotlight here at the top, type Substance, a lot like the Photoshop way. Alright, so we're going to let this boot up. It does take a couple of seconds. Now notice I did close down my Photoshop and whatnot. And they update Substance quite frequently. But what we can do here with Substance are some amazing things. So here's your Substance layout. Now don't be intimidated by all this stuff. It's actually, like I mentioned just a second ago, a lot like Photoshop. What I'm going to do is actually import my file. So over here, or I can also do new. When I hit Project New, I get this option. Now, I like to use this thing called PBR Metal Rough. I select next to my mesh, and I'm going to go to, let's go to our pencil that we just exported. So let's find it. There it is, pencil export, hit open. And what this is going to do when I hit OK, it's kind of cool. It brings in my pencil model. And this is kind of a real-time, it's almost like you're in Sketchfab, but you can actually paint your textures. So there's the pencil. It looks really good. I think everything comes in okay. Yeah, it sure does. And we also get a material, which is kind of neat. So we can kind of turn that on and off by hitting our F keys, our F1 and F2 keys. You can actually hit F3 and see it by itself. But what this is a way to texture multiple portions of your material. You can texture the bumpiness, you can texture the normal map, which we haven't really talked about, but we'll get into in a little bit. We can change the metallic or the specular attribute. So I'm going to set this up the same exact way as I did in Maya. I'm going to go to my layers panel, and before I even texture anything, I'm going to add a couple folders. I'm going to add my metal folder. I'm going to add my wood folder. I'm going to add my, I think I said, body of pencil yellow folder. And we have that good old eraser folder. And then the graphite. There we go. So we have all our folders. We can delete that layer. And we have everything going to go. Now I'm holding Alt. I'm moving around in here just like I move in Maya. Middle mouse button, zoom with the right mouse button. So it does give me some options. And before I get started with this, there's a couple cool things that Substance will do automatically. So once I make my folders, if I go ahead and navigate to the texture settings window and kind of scroll in there, I want to find the thing that says Bake Textures. And when I hit Bake Textures, a couple of the things I can do, I can actually bake a normal map, but I want to uncheck all the boxes except ambient occlusion and curvature. Just keep those by default. You can click on them and see all the stuff, but we'll learn more about these as we go in the semester, but I'm going to bake those in. And what this is going to do is actually give me a little shading. And if you guys can tell, it kind of darkened some areas on our model, especially where elements are touching one another. And it looks rather decent, so I kind of dig that. Okay, cool. So now that I have these, I want to continue to work. So let's do this. We're going to use materials that they already provide. These are like shaders times 1,000. You can see we have all different types of metals and, you know, different shininesses and whatnot. We can go ahead and add these. So let's go ahead and add, I don't know, maybe like a brass, because that's what I want. And we're going to drag it with the left mouse button to the word metal, and it makes everything look metallic. Okay, we'll deal with that in a second. We have wood, so maybe we can search for wood. That's not really the wood we want, but we'll put it in there. It'll make everything look wood. Maybe we can change the color here in a second. We have the yellow paint of the pencil. So maybe we can do, that's kind of a plastic material, I would guess, because it's like a somewhat plasticky pencil. We'll change the color in a second there. The eraser was red, and it was more of a matte finish. So I can see, and you can download these online too. They make tons of them. Just kind of go through, maybe we'll do this fabric soft and see what that comes in as. No, not really my cup of tea, so I'll hit delete. And maybe do fabric rough. Let's see if that gives us anything different. Yeah, that kind of has a weird texture to it. That's good. And let's try this black one for the graphite. Kind of go down. This one says steel or rust. And actually, we're going to keep this one and we're going to just put a new layer in it. We'll do something very, very simple and just fill it with black paint. So we'll put a layer in graphite and fill it with black. and that's going to be really important. So we'll make sure that that one layer is completely black, and we'll go back to that and look at that in a second. All right, now that you have all of these, we want to go and click on them and look at some of the parameters. So for instance, for our pencil tip, if I turn all the eyeballs off here, because again, this works just like Photoshop, see, when I turn them on, I can go ahead and lighten some areas. I can play with the dynamic. I actually play with the fibers of the pencil and go in here, the different layers, so I can make it look more pencil-like. Now we're getting somewhere. So that looks really good. I can go to the metal area and click on that and click on the brass shader and play around with maybe the metallic shininess of it and whatnot. Now the problem here is in Substance, everything's being covered at once. So how do we isolate this? Well, just like in Photoshop, we use masks. And there's tons of ways to add a mask, but there's really, really cool ways to add them here in Substance Painter. So if I click on metal and I right click and I say add black mask, it's going to add a black mask. And I'm going to go ahead and do that and add a black mask to every single one of my folders. This plastic material too, we need to make kind of yellow for the pencil body. Perfect. So we'll add a black mask on we're doing this on the top folders here, not on the actual layers underneath it. The eraser we know is going to be red, so we can click on the color and kind of find that red. There we go. Cool. And then the graphite we haven't really dealt with yet, but we'll add a black mask anyway. Alright, so I've just hidden all of the elements. Now I want to reveal them in specific places. So I can actually use my UV map and their shells for this, and this is what makes Substance awesome. If you click in the mask and go over here to the top left corner, you have a polygon fill item. If I click on polygon fill, it opens a whole new window, one of which has the words or the letters UV chunk fill. UV chunk fill sounds disgusting, but there it is. And if I'm in the mask and I just simply click what needs to be metal, it shows up metal. If I click on the mask of the eraser, and I can also click over here, and I click in here, look what it's doing, guys. It's masking out those areas. Pretty cool, right? All right, so this needs to be yellow up here, so I'll click. It makes it yellow. And we'll zoom out. There it is. This needs to be wood, so I'll just click on wood. This is our graphite, so we'll make sure that we click on that piece for graphite. We don't have anything in it yet, but something we can do. And now what we can do is actually we could even do a fill or a polygon fill. So we can actually even go into specific polygons and play with that. Let's go ahead and first deal with what we got going here right now. So if I want to paint, I grab my layer and I put it in here. I actually had a layer in there, so we'll use that one. And I get my paintbrush and use my bracket keys. What I can do is actually paint on top of specific areas. So if I just want to paint on this mask, what that's going to do, it's going to be very hard to see with my computer's running out of space here. There it is. You see it? Pretty neat, right? Here I can go ahead and use that square with the red arrow, and I can attempt to fill this. So I can use some of the different polygon fill tools here. Sounds good. Get my black paintbrush. Look at that. Pretty cool, right? Same with the yellow. If I wanted to add this yellow mask to it, could do that. I don't want to make it all yellow, but if I paint in here using my brush key, let's see. Let's see if I can't paint that mask. Go into the yellow and let's make this white. There it goes. Can reveal some of this yellow. This is a very, very cool tool. This is a tool they're using in industry right now. EA uses this, all different types of places. And I'm going to just do this very quickly so you guys can kind of see the results. But it's a really, really neat tool that really produces quick, fast results. And you can see the overall appearance of this is pretty cool in the sense of the realism behind it. And the great thing about that is you can continue to add layers in each subfolder. So if I add a layer here and I want to, in the yellow pencil, write something, or to use maybe some of these different types of kind of damage techniques. Let's see if I can find where I just did that. There it is. I could do that. Now I'm not just painting color here too. I can also paint height. So I can dig in and do chew marks by changing the height of my brush. If I go into the middle and I set my brush to 0, which is completely black, remember black conceals, white reveals. Now if I just paint, it's just going to draw lines. But look at all these different things I have to play with. So let's go into, maybe it's an old eraser and it's kind of cracked and gross and whatnot. So we'll do a new layer. We'll put it on top. This is the new layer stack. Put it on top here. And remember, white reveals. So I can look and I can say, all right, I don't want it to do, I want it to kind of break into it. There we go. Or I only want it to do it a certain amount. I can go ahead and do that. Right? Pretty neat. And I can even control if it does color or not. So if I go and grab this and I turn off the color tab, it's now just going to allow me to paint in other modes. So in this case, it will just paint the height and not paint black in there. Pretty crazy. I can also go in and paint just color. So if I want to turn off all these other shininess and I want to just go in and paint color on the eraser, I can do that and just paint my color. It's totally up to you. So this is a really good thing, especially to play with, because Substance is kind of endless on what it can do. There's many different things. There's smart filters. These filters will show you a whole ton of things. You can actually add dirt to something. So if I put a smart filter onto this one area and I remove these, let's do this. We can kind of add a little bit of custom flare and custom finish to it. So it's really, really a neat kind of function to kind of mess around with and really kind of get your workflow started. So again, we have the ability to customize and to add smart masks or generate. Generators are cool because you can generate things like dirt on them and it will actually start putting in elements of dirt in your eraser. So when we go and paint that down the road, you'll have like a really cool element. So let's see if I can get that to work for y'all. We'll keep it back to red here. And let's add a generator and see if we can add dirt. Oh yeah, lots of dirt, too much dirt. We turn down the grunge, the scale. We have transparency. And then we can even add another layer. We have a fill layer, by the way. If you really want to add a fill layer, you can put that underneath. There we go. So you can pull that red back in there. play a little bit more with the dirt now. So start getting that kind of cool effect going there. You can turn this down a little bit. Start getting some really cool custom effects. So pretty neat program. When you're totally done, you just simply right click and say export textures, and if you go into your setup, you can kind of look through all the different options, but by default it will give you a base color, it will give you a roughness. Your roughness map is essentially your specular map, or you can also use your metallic map for that, and it will give you a normal map as well. All of these can be plugged back into Maya. So when we export these and I open the folder, check out some of the stuff we have. We have that color map. It's pretty messy looking, but we have it. We have a mask map for the metallic, so what's metallic and what's not. We also have, like I mentioned, a more refined specular map in the roughness map, so roughness is the way you're going to want to go. And you can kind of see you have a normal map, which makes no sense right now, but we'll get into all those and see all the little shapes that I made. And we have something called an occlusion bake, which we'll talk about later in the semester. These are just tools to get you where you need to go for your textures. And if I go on to websites like TurboSquid, for instance, and I type pencil, and I see areas like this that are completely textured, this is a very clean way of what they got. You can see they painted this one primarily in Photoshop. This is a bump map or a normal map that they used. You can kind of see, let's let this load a second here. You can kind of see the results. Very similar to our model, but you can see all the little details that were added. So I challenge you now to go and use some of the methods that we have here to try to produce a specular map, a normal or a bump map, either or, and a color map for your pencil. Your ultimate goal is to try to get it as realistic as possible using the tools that I've given you. Now again, this differs from a normal follow along because in this follow along I want to see your creativity. I want to see if you can't achieve some of these cool kind of final finishes that you can see. You can even see on the pencil here the textural bump or normal map that's on it is pretty neat. So be creative, use your problem solving techniques, and mix and match the techniques I've shown you to produce your final follow along. In the end, what you're going to do is render a still of your pencil. So remember in Maya, let's go ahead and do that real quick so I can show you. Rendering is not too bad, it's not going to take you a lot of time. Give it a second here. We'll do File, Recent. Close this, focus on this, and we'll do the render button at the top, and there's your render. Now, I will warn you, it's going to look a lot better in Substance Painter because right now in Maya we don't currently have any lighting techniques. Now I'll show you more Substance Painter stuff as we get closer to the texturing deadline, but when you render it in Maya you would then right click, save image, make sure you save a color managed image and hit save, and that's when you're going to get your image. But yours is going to look like a pencil. So again, it may not look as photorealistic as it did in Substance. That's okay. I just want to make sure you guys know the workflow of going in here and using your shader and plugging in a color map. Let me open this to a blend so you guys can see. A specular color map, which will go into specular color, and then a bump or normal map that will go into bump mapping. So hopefully this gives you some starting tools, and I look forward to seeing your textured pencils. Thanks, guys.